If you're looking to build a 9800X3D mini ITX PC, then today's video is definitely going to excite you. Where for me personally, I'm going to be doing a new main PC, or at least a co-main PC, where I've already finished up with my 9950X experiment. I'm ready to talk about that. But then there's one more piece of the puzzle, and that is I wanted to try the single CCD Ryzen flagship CPU, the 9800X3D, as not just a gaming CPU, but as a main workhorse PC. And in today's video, we're going to be using this in conjunction with the Performance 1M from Antec, which is a case they sent over. They wanted me to take a look at this thing, and I absolutely love mini ITX. Right now, it's my current favorite format for building a PC, and so I'll be able to tell you guys all the ins and outs of this case, what it's like, what are the temperatures, especially if we add in, say, 2 fans down the bottom and use them for intake. Is the temperatures going to go down? Are they going to be comparable to that of even my benchmark rig, which I use as a benchmark standard to give you guys an idea of whether this case is going to be good or not. Now, the premise here of this case is that it is a bit bigger, and so it's 19 liters. And so it's a little bit bigger than, say, my current mini ITX rig, which is 10 liters roughly. And so it's going up a bit in size, but it's also a bit heavier because they use aluminium and steel in the construction. They got anodized aluminium on the bracketing here, which makes it really strong for the chassis, as well as having this red, black accented theme, which also is really high quality. But that said, does come at a cost, and that is going to be $250 or $249 USD. Though it is a modular design on the side panels, though a little bit more on that later, because I want to talk about the build here today, where I'm going to be going through this whole air-cooled 9800X3D setup, and I've already come into a bit of a problem here, and that is with this ID cooling solution here, where I got this off AliExpress a while ago. It fits fine on this setup, but the problem here is the RAM clearance is only just standard sized RAM with no heat sinks. And this problem is here, this is only 6000 CL42 or something like that, and it's only 32 gigabyte kit. For a main system, I want to be using 64 gigabytes, so I'll be having to go with a different ITX cooler, something like this Cryorig C7. Hopefully it fits fine, and then I can use this taller memory. So we're going to be changing that over before we start this build, but also I'm going to be talking about some of the settings I use in the BIOS, and especially when I'm tuning an air cooler system versus a water cooler system, some of the things I look out for, as well as installing Windows 10 as always. And today's video sponsor, VIP SCD keys, make it so that we can activate that Windows 10 copy with ease, though more on that later too. Let's get on to this build right here. So we're gonna have to scratch that idea, because this Cryorig C7, apparently it needs a custom AM4 bracket, and that's, I don't know, that's gonna take me a while to get one of those. So what we're gonna do instead is actually remove the heat sinks from the G.Skill memory. Again, probably not recommended because those heat sinks do serve a purpose, but maybe we'll be able to get away with 1.35 volt on the DDR5 memory there. Let's just see what we can get back together here, and even maybe try and use this bracket as well, because it's pretty cool to have these brackets. So finished off the Performance 1 build here, at least the preliminary build before we add in the fans, and it was extremely easy to build in. That's probably the best part of this case, was you can take the whole tray out, get your build ready, and there was just no hiccups at all. But keep in mind, here is a size comparison of the current Mini ITX rig I have and the Performance 1M. But keep in mind, I do have a massive 420mm water cooler hanging out, because if I travel with this rig, I then just detach the water cooler, and I've got another water cooler in Japan sitting at my friend's house, which I can then just quickly pick up and attach, and we're good to go, at least in a stationary location. So this one here though, we can go away with the water cooler, but obviously we've just then got a bit bigger of a size on the case here, nearly double at 19 liters versus the 10 liters that we've got. Though with all that said, let's get on to some performance testing here with this case, as well as adding in some additional fans. But before we do that, we've also got to tune up the rig and install Windows. All right, so now that we're in the BIOS here, since we are on a Mini ITX A620, I'm not exactly sure how much wiggle room we'll have in terms of certain settings. But the first thing, of course, we do is we lock in our XMP profiles, which I'm going to use the DRAM performance mode aggressive, but also I'm going to try and just bump that up to 6200 and give my Infinity Fabric speeds a quick bump there too, as well as giving the SoC just a little bump to 1.23. And then after that, there are a few settings that I still like to change here, and that is the TPM switch. I just disable that, because the reason I do that, the main reason, is because I do interchange sometimes with drives. For instance, if I'm in a pinch and I don't have time to do a fresh install of Windows, having these settings like this security device support disabled, secure boot disabled, I can then just quickly change a drive over to another system and know that I can get to my files and have things work. So this is actually really cool too. This A620 ITX has Precision Boost Overdrive, which is really good. But we can't do anything by the looks of it in terms of negative steps there. So we'll leave that on, but I'm not sure if it's actually going to do a whole lot though. So there we go. But also some other options here. I do like to turn off the spread spectrum here, as well as going in and making sure my GPU is on the DGPU mode only, because that will just make sure that iGPU is disabled. I never use it anyway. And right now we go to secure boot, that's disabled, and then we make sure CSM's disabled too. And we should also have, on that note, above 4G decoding enabled and resize bar support enabled too. So that's just our quick settings there to get the most out of this. So we've now finally just finished tuning our PC, and unfortunately we cannot get the 6200 megahertz. We actually did get it, but it's unstable. And unfortunately, I believe that's just, we've got like the trifecta combo going on here. An A620 motherboard coupled in with air cooling, coupled in with me pulling the heat sinks off the G.Skill memory. So I'm actually surprised it got to Windows at 6200. And you may notice that the CL timings are a little bit slower than, say, the CL28 6000 that we use on our benchmark rig. And that's because it's a 64 gigabyte kit. So they do slow it down a little bit because you've got more memory there. So that's either way, it seems like it's stable now at just its regular 6000 CL30 with the Infinity Fabric at 2000. However, you notice that the idling on the air cooling is already quite high. So I'm hoping this won't throttle when we run Cinebench, but we'll find out very soon, because we're going to talk about quickly today's video sponsor, which is VIP SSD keys. If you want to get Windows, like we've got here, Windows 10 activated, or if you want to get Windows 11 activated, it's as easy as just getting a USB bootable ready, downloading which Windows you want to use, whether it's 10 Home or Pro or 11 Home or Pro, and then loading that onto the USB stick, installing Windows, and then after you're in Windows, you can go to the change product key, insert your product key and then activate, and you should be good to go. Now, in terms of getting this product key, this is where the sponsor comes in, and that's VIP SCD keys. They offer it for an extremely good price if you use the link in the description below. So we can get activated for Windows 10 Pro, for example, for as little as $15 after we use that coupon code TYC. And then on checkout, you've got different payment options, like we got PayPal, debit or credit card, and other options there too. Though if you don't like Windows 10, you want to go with Windows 11, they've got that option too, but it does cost a little bit more. I think these are around $20 to $22, depending on the season with Windows 11 keys. Though guys, easy as to get activated. I'll put those links in the description below. Let's get back to this beast of a 9800 X3D rig. Okay, so what we're seeing here is we're running a few Cinebench runs here, and the CPU temperatures seem to be capping out at 75 degrees. So it's almost like there's a hard cap in the BIOS that we're gonna have to try and circumvent, because I was like surprised. I was like, there's no way this air cooler's keeping it as low as 75 degrees when our idle temps were so high. But sure enough, our Cinebench score seems to represent that there is a little bit of throttling going on, as we'll see very soon here, and it gets to around 20,663 points. So it's not too bad. Like, we're not losing a whole lot of performance, especially for 75 degrees, which is quite good on max temps. But we're gonna go into the BIOS and just see if we can find the culprit here and see if we can just raise those temperatures to maybe about 90 degrees, at least when it comes to work-intensive things like Cinebench. So changing that limit to 90 degrees has already responded with, obviously, the temperatures going from 75 to 90. So we're now throttling at 90 instead of 75, but our performance in Cinebench has jumped over 22,000 points, close to the mid 22,000s, which is a lot closer to our water-cooled results that we got in our initial review. And so I'm not going to be getting too, I guess, throttled of an experience with this whole system, especially if I'm using it as my main rig. I want to get at least close to the best experience possible with it so I can judge it properly. So the 75 degree limit, you're leaving a lot of performance on the table there, especially when it comes to its max potential. But this seems to be a good balance where 95 degrees is starting to get a bit too much. But at these levels, we're going up to around 145 watts. I would have loved to have had the option to undervolt it via the Precision Boost Overdrive, but unfortunately that's the limitations of the A620 there. And we've got the all-core clocks here still going over 5 gigahertz, which really isn't too bad. So I'm pretty happy with this air cooling setup at the moment. However, the biggest problem I'm going to have right here is testing at least the CPU side of the equation out with the Performance 1M. I'm not going to be able to do that properly because it's already throttling. So for testing the case right now, we're actually going to have to go to the GPU and set that to a static fan speed, and then we can test that now with the configuration it's in now. We can also test it with the side panels all off, and then we can install the fans and test with the fans on too. So let's get onto those tests right now and see how it performs. So all of our benchmarking numbers have now been completed, and we got some really good news too, because I just finished editing probably 2/3 of this video on the 9800 X3D. And I can give you guys my first impressions already, and that is, for at least my workflow, it is much better than the 9950X. In fact, the first thing I checked for was the hitching issue that I had on the 9950X. It wasn't there on the 9800 X3D. So that's more or less a penalty that will be incurred from using 16 cores versus the 8 cores, at least with the Ryzen 9000 series CPUs. Then, of course, there is the gaming, which, again, I'm gonna test this over a couple of months with the 9800 X3D, and see if the negatives that were on the 9950X, if they go and span into things like games and stuff like that. But so far, my first impressions are this is a legit successor to my i9 10850K in practically every way I can think of so far. So first impressions, really good for the 9800X3D. Though now it's time to talk about the Performance 1M from Antec. And this has a love-hate relationship. I'm gonna be straight up here because there are things that I think Antec have absolutely nailed, and then there's other things that I think Antec have missed. And so we'll start off with the really good things, and that is the build quality and the temperatures are phenomenal for an ITX case. And we're gonna talk about the build quality first because the ability to just build with ease is something that Antec does focus on. And this is no different. For building up a mini ITX PC, it was a complete breeze. The only problem I came into was with this. We used this Cooler Master Mini ITX power supply we had around because it had the 600 watt PCIe Gen 5 link from the power supply to the GPU. So I only had to use one cable, but the problem was it was a 90-degree angle without any sort of flexibility there. So it was kind of like a bit of a mounting problem where the connector was a bit off. But outside of that, everything spacious, really easy to build in, and also the build quality was phenomenal. Now, the biggest thing about this case is that you've got the flexibility on both the CPU and GPU side of the case to change the dimensions there in terms of you can fit up to a 3-slot 78mm thick GPU that can be 350mm long too. But if you don't need as much room on the GPU side and you need, say, more room on the CPU side, you can then fit up to an 85mm CPU cooler height there if you've got a smaller GPU that's less thick. So you can move the tray around essentially back and forth to whichever you need more space on. Now, since we're using a 4090, we did use up a lot of that space on the GPU side. However, we did use a smaller air cooler, the ID, I think it's 50 from AliExpress, and this enabled us to fit the whole build together. Though in total, just keep in mind, you've got 125mm of width between your cooler height and your GPU thickness together. So that's the rated thickness there. Of course, if you don't mind having no side panels on, you can definitely use a taller CPU cooler, which is something that I honestly entertained with my previous ITX system, and that's just, I've got a water cooler completely hanging out of that thing. Though we hinted on the temperatures, let's focus more on that right now. 25-degree ambient temperature here. The RTX 4090, 60% static fan speed. This is actually what I use on my benchmark system too, so it's easy to get a comparison here between if this case is doing a good job cooling or not. And here's where, with the panels all removed on this static fan speed, we had a temperature of 70 degrees and then a hotspot of 80 degrees while we're testing Mark II. Now, taking two fans into the bottom of the equation as an intake didn't actually change this temperature at all. I was actually surprised because you'll notice with the default setup with the mesh sides, the perforated sides there, that was allowing temperatures to raise up 3 degrees on the core, and then the hotspot got 4 degrees higher. But however, with the fans, the two Nova 120mm installed down the bottom, bringing intake, we dropped it down to 71 degrees and 82 degrees. So there was a noticeable drop there in favor of getting close to the panels off configuration. However, the glass panel as well as the semi-glass, I decided to just go away with them instantly because the temperatures just went stupid. And they were going, like, after a minute, I was already up to 81 degrees on both these setups, as well as having 93 degrees on the hotspots. Now, with an RTX 4090, it's just a no-go because, again, it's a really expensive GPU, but also that heat is just getting dumped into the atmosphere of the case. And like I've said in the past, I believe this is a contributing factor towards melting connectors. And so I would be very careful about using this glass panel or the semi-glass on a high-end build. So at least that's what I've seen here today with that temperature, even after only a minute. Because again, I'm not going to bother testing outside of that because the temperature increase is so dramatic, so fast, that I don't want to damage my hardware, especially a GPU that costs about 5 or 6-fold the cost of this case alone. So for me, it's just simply not worth it to continue with this test, as well as on that note, then not recommend people bother with the glass panels in this case if they're going for a high performance build. So the glass panels, they are optional, and for me personally, I'm gonna give them a miss. And thanks for Antec for sending them over, but I'm not going to be recommending them either with the Performance 1M. Though summing up the temperatures, here's where the default configuration with the perforated side panels all on, it does a phenomenal job considering this is Mini ITX and it's an RTX 4090 in Mark II. So this isn't an easy task to handle, and especially with the two fans down the bottom, it did a phenomenal job. And also here's where we quickly talk about the build quality, and that is everything is just solid. There's no creaks, there's no squeaks or anything like that. Everything was really solid, really straightforward. So the build quality is just right up there when it comes to this case. So overall, really impressed with those things, as well as the fact that Antec have stated, at least with the brochure that they included, that they're committed to adding things in the future. So perhaps you can unscrew the front panel and then put in a different front panel with more I/O options, or perhaps a digital display. So they're things that they're going to be looking at adding into the future for the Performance 1M. So I hope they do add in some cool options, but for me personally, I want the option of adding in water cooling. And so this is where we're gonna go to the negatives here, because I feel like for a 19-liter case, not including the option to get, say, even just a 120 mil water cooler is a missed opportunity here, because I really want to install a water cooler on this Mini ITX system. I think as I've just been editing and I'm telling you how impressive the 9800X3D is, the 9800X3D is also going to be more impressive on water cooling, but also the fan noises really get to me. I realize that now because my previous rig has a 420 mil water cooler on it that doesn't make a peep, and the GPU is tuned for low noise. This is where you just set that static fan speed on the GPU, and especially for a workload, it's not going to be doing anything. And then when you undervolt it, it's going to have the low noise anyway because it's not chewing up as much power. And so this configuration, the water cooling and the undervolted GPU, just make for a workstation that is whisper quiet. And that's what I want from a Mini ITX system. So I'm going to be looking to get a water cooler on this thing, but it's just a shame at 19 liters. I feel like Antec really could have included the option to maybe get a 240 mil in here with more space efficiency management. So that's the one thing for me personally I'm going to be knocking a point off for. The second thing is the front I/O, or should I say lack of I/O. There's no front audio connector. There's also no USB, just type A ports in general. There's just a type C and just a power button, when I'd like to maybe have a reset button too, as well as having the LED lights, especially on a $250 case. So that's one thing I'd like to see, is more I/O at the front as well. So they're the two things that bothered me with the Performance 1M. And so the last thing though, we'll talk about the value here, the price. I think for what they've done with this case, $249, yes, it's a big ask, but the steel and aluminum construction, the anodized aluminum, the red-black aesthetic, I absolutely love the red-black aesthetic personally. I think it's one of my favorite color schemes, as well as white and red too. I love that color scheme, as well as blue and black, as well as green and black too. So I love these simple color schemes, and the red and black definitely hits the sweet spot, especially if you're doing an AMD build, a 9800X3D. I think that color scheme's really good, but I'd also like to see them offer it in green and blue as well as perhaps a white theme with those other three color choices of RGB. But ultimately with the Performance 1M, definitely the name in the title, the performance, it hits the mark there. They've definitely focused on the build quality, the ease of building, and the performance. Those three things do check out with this case. So if you're looking to build a high-end Mini ITX system and you want to use air cooling, or perhaps you want to keep the side panel off and use water cooling, but you want a really good case, especially with a high-end GPU that's going to have decent airflow, especially with the option to mount the fans down the bottom, this is definitely going to check the box. But just keep in mind, it is going to be expensive, but it is going to be one really solid case. Anyhow, guys, all that aside, I hope you enjoyed today's video and looking at my new transfer to another main rig, continuing on with these experiments. But basically, for what it's worth, up until this point, 9800X3D is going to be much better for a lot of people than a 9950X, especially for what I do, and that's heavy video editing at 4K, as well as gaming. And so those two things are going to be better on the 9800X3D than the 9950X. Now, for the 9950X, it's going to be great if you need those cores and threads. And if you do, you're going to know who you are. So that is an option too. It's just for me personally, 9800X3D is definitely a better choice for my workflow and for what I do than the 9950X and also the i9-10850K. I finally got a successor right here on the desk, though I do have to look at perhaps getting a water cooler upgrade as well as a motherboard upgrade to say a B650 ITX, because I do like to tune the PBO settings with the undervolts. But speaking of tuning and performance, one last thing we'll throw in, of course, is the gaming benchmarks, where I just decided to test 2 quick games here. That was Age of Mythology, 1080p mythical settings. At 1080p here, we were missing out on some performance versus my benchmark system. And also on Baldur's Gate 3, we were missing a chunk of performance there too. Though in terms of examining the performance differential, I will get to the bottom of that when I finish off my final update on personal usage on my main rig. And I will tell you if it's mainly the memory or the water cooling or the motherboard or a combination of all 3. You will hear an update on that. But the last thing I'll talk about too is with my workflow. I have in the meantime had an upgrade on my mouse and my mouse pad. And these are like 2 endgame items that have improved my workflow as well. So I am accounting for that bias, but keep in mind, I have been using this mouse and keyboard on my i9 setup as well as the 9950X setup. So that's sort of changed and still remains in the realm of an apples to apples comparison in terms of everything being the same. And when I give out my opinions, that's not affecting that. Anyhow, guys, all that done, let me know in the comment section today what you think of today's content. Do you have any questions about the 9800X3D, air cooling, water cooling mini ITX, or the Performance 1M? I'll put some links in the description below for you guys in relation to this case if you want to find out more information on it. I do believe it will be released at the end of January. That's at least what I'm told. Though it's going to be an exciting case for people who really like the aesthetic and want some of the best performance. Anyhow, guys, big thanks to Antec for sending this one out, and I'll catch you in the next video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.